"No peasant girl would dare reject me," laughed the Count. But when she said no, the hall fell silent. "Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from." The music moved like a ribbon around the room, light and careful, as if the violins themselves understood that all great houses were built on keeping a beat. Laughter skated along the edges. Fans whispered. Shoes touched the tiles with pride that had learned to disguise itself as ease. It was late, but late in a palace does not mean the end of a night. It means the hour when people forget they are being watched and begin to perform honestly. The Count of Aragon had chosen that hour. Vanity picks its moments with the skill of a court musician. He stood beneath a chandelier that did not merely glow, it approved. He raised his cup, let the candlelight find his ring, and lifted his voice so it could travel the room without shouting. "No peasant girl would dare reject me," he laughed, and the laughter rose with him like steam from a winter dish. He said it as if humoring a friend, as if it were a gentle joke he allowed the room to share. The room was practiced at this kind of humor. It rewarded him with smiles and a hum of comfortable agreement. They looked at him. They looked toward his circle. They looked at one another to judge the strength of the current. They did not look down, which is where the serving girls are, because to see a serving girl is to accept that she sees you see her. Yet the Count had invited everyone to look. "Bring one of the girls nearer," he said pleasantly, as if ordering a piece of music. "Let us test the boldness of the times." A page nodded and moved into the current of bodies. He went to the edge, where the light thinned and the motion of the hall became chores. The girls there held trays steady as ships hold their masts in fresh wind. They wore skirts meant not to speak, bodices meant not to breathe too loudly. They carried the night on their backs the way a wall carries a house. Isabella did not think of herself as part of a joke. She thought about the weight of the silver. She thought about the distance between her hand and the nearest table. She counted how many cups remained and how many faces were thirsty. She thought about the ribbon at her waist that kept her apron tied when a tie wanted to loosen under heat. She kept her face clear and her hands clean. The page stopped and gestured to her with a tilt of his chin. His tone was not unkind. "The Count requests your presence." "Do you know which Count?" another girl whispered. Not from malice, but from fear disguised as gossip. Isabella lifted the tray to a waiting lady, set it down with grace she learned from her mother, and let the weight leave her hands. She wiped a finger quickly on the apron's hem, not to hide a stain, but to make sure that when she was looked at, the way she would be looked at, the look would not be able to find anything to point at that was hers to control. She walked into the bright. The hall was bigger when you were being watched. The steps in front of her seemed more than other steps. She did not slow. She did not hurry. She walked as if she were carrying something fragile, and perhaps she was. The Count let his eyes find her without moving his head. He was a man made for rooms like this one. His smile was one of those smiles that announces it could be mercy if you behave. It is at heart a negotiation masked as indulgence. "What is your name?" he asked. If the room loved him, the room leaned forward. "Isabella Morales, my lord." Isabella. He rolled the syllables as if checking their weight. Morales. He looked as though he appreciated the sound and forgave the origin. "From a tenant family, I imagine." She did not lie. "Yes, my lord." His expression invited the room to be pleased with him. Ah, honest and quick. A very modern combination. He extended a hand as if to bless a child. "Come, raise your face, so they do not think I speak to shadows." She obeyed, but only the first half. She raised her face. He meant raise your eyes and your gratitude, but she raised her face and kept her eyes steady, not high, not lowered, exactly level with the respect a person keeps in her own bones. "Is it true," he asked her, "that a man of my station can say that no peasant girl would dare refuse me anything I am pleased to offer, and remain equally unstung in pride and conscience?" The room stretched into a smile with him, startled by the sweet cruelty of his phrasing. It was a trick, of course. There were only two paths in front of Isabella. Accept the soft humiliation and be praised for grace, or stumble in resistance and be considered comical. She understood it the way she understands a doorframe. It is there to pass through, but it can also bruise a shoulder. She answered the only truth she owned. "My lord, if the thing offered is unkind, A peasant girl may refuse it and keep both her pride and her conscience. And if the thing offered is kind, she may accept it and keep the same. The room's smile faltered, not from offense but from a collective intake of breath at hearing a complete thought in plain language. The Count's eyes narrowed very slightly, which is how a man who has always been the host shows that a guest has surprised him. He did not blink. He did not show that he had been required to do any thinking at all. He laughed again, softly, as if apologizing for everyone's tension. "You see," he said, "we share a modern taste for riddles. Let me be simple then, for the sake of the hour. Isabella Morales, will you kneel and kiss my hand as a token that you know who protects your roof and your bread?" Silence is a hand placed over music. It does not crush it. It tells it to wait. Isabella felt the air change around her shoulders. She thought of her mother's hands on the olive press and the way those hands had taught her not to make promises she could not keep. She thought of the ribbon at her waist and the moment every morning when she tied it and told herself that the day could be shaped. No, my lord. It was small. It was clear. It sounded like water poured into a copper cup, the way the note rings and then disappears, leaving you with the proof that something true has weight. The nearest violin did not know whether to stop or continue. It chose to be honest and startled. The bow scraped. The music fell into silence like a bird startled off a branch. A page behind Isabella, whose attention had been on watching the Count's face for cues, let a goblet slip against the rim of a tray. It fell, and the sound it made when it struck the tile was not a crash but a scandal. A circle of wine widened toward Isabella's shoes, as if the floor was learning to blush. The Count smiled. A practiced smile, the kind used to calm horses and boys. He lowered his hand with deliberate grace so that no one could say it had been refused. He turned his wrist as if displaying the ring had been his intent all along. "This is why we are kind," he said lightly, "because it is a mercy to give the untrained a chance to try again." He looked past her shoulder with a benevolent air, as if addressing the room in which she happened to be standing. "My friends, do not startle. We are teaching manners, not conducting an inquisition." He glanced back at Isabella. "Shall we reset the little scene?" She did not move. She did not look terrified, which is usually the next act. She looked steady. Steadiness has a way of drawing attention from every corner, because it feels like something is about to happen that no one wrote down in their schedule. "If you require me to kneel, my lord, I cannot." A soft exhalation moved across the room like a wave. One could hear the cloth of dresses shift as shoulders pressed closer to friends. People who had been happy to borrow the Count's confidence now borrowed each other's. "You cannot?" He sounded not angry but curious, which was worse. "Then instruct me. Perhaps you will teach me something this old house has not yet learned." "I cannot, because kneeling is a thing I would do to ask a blessing, and a blessing is not something you ask from a man who makes a jest of a person's bread." The sentence felt long in her mouth, but she did not remove any of its parts to ease it. Someone coughed. Someone else murmured a prayer in a voice like a secret. Doña Beatriz, a widow who knew how to arrange a room with one lifted eyebrow, turned her fan half closed and said, "Oh dear," softly enough for the nearest 6 people to hear and feel chosen. Don Alvaro de Villena had been at the edge of the circle, attentive but still, because he belonged to a kind of man who survives a court by being the quieter companion in any conversation. He watched Isabella with the same care he had used to watch a line of men in a field, a different kind of weather. He recognized steadiness, the way a man recognizes a road he has walked twice. His hand closed around the stem of his cup. He did not drink. The Count replaced his cup on a nearby table himself, a small display that said he could do what others do and make it look like benevolence. He took a breath as measured as a prayer. "It will amuse you to know," he said to the room, "that I have no wish to embarrass anyone tonight. I will not request this young woman to kneel." He paused just long enough to let generosity build like a tower of cards. "Instead, I ask her to thank me with her eyes. A glance is lighter than a feather. Even a prideful sparrow can afford a feather." Isabella met his gaze. "My gratitude belongs to those who keep their promises, my lord." The word promises carried a strange suggestion. It pressed on the corners of the room where law and custom keep company. It brought to mind leases and oaths. It brought to mind the way a name can be a roof and a debt can be a leak, and how both can be made to work in any weather by a hand that owns the plans. The Count's smile thinned. It did not vanish. It changed from savoring to assessing. He looked not at her, but at the people who were watching him watch her, as if to say, "Whatever happens now happens for you, and you will call it graceful, because I have called it so." He took a napkin from a passing tray and laid it over the spilled wine with the care of a man who knows how to hide stains under good linen. "My house is not made of fear," he said pleasantly. "It is built upon order. If order is a kind of kindness, then I am the kindest man in Toledo." He lifted the napkin to show that the red was kept from traveling. "See? A small measure of attention and the flood behaves." A court usher in livery stood at the edge of the light, waiting for the moment when attention would wander so he could approach without you noticing him approach. He did not get the chance to be invisible. The Count saw him and lifted 2 fingers. "Yes?" "A folded paper, my lord," the usher said with a neat bow that made a sentence of his body. "For your review." The Count extended his hand. He did not look away from Isabella as he took the paper. He made the opening of the fold a performance meant to soothe the room. "See? This is merely business, like breathing, like turning a page." He read without reading, or pretended to, which can have the same calming effect when performed perfectly. He nodded. He spoke as if he were thinking aloud for the benefit of his friends, so that they could join him in the act of being reasonable. "There is, it seems, a small confusion of entries in certain tenancies under my patronage. A light revision at dawn will set it to rights." He smiled at the Duchess nearest him. "The sun is very good at correcting the arithmetic of the night." Doña Beatriz lifted her eyes just enough to seem charitable. "What wisdom," she breathed, "the way one compliments a cut of cloth. It does not make the cloth better, but it makes everyone aware that we are in the presence of something meant to fit." Isabella heard the word tenancies and felt a tightness in her throat that did not rise as tears. It settled like a stone. She thought of the small room where contracts slept in tidy stacks, and of the steward's hand that could wake them. She thought of the olive trees that did not know the language of courts, yet spoke of years by existing at all. "My lord," she said softly enough that it was brave to have anyone hear it, but clearly enough that courage would not be mistaken for confusion. "If the revisions touch my family, will we be told in time to understand what we are accused of?" The Count's eyebrows tilted with polite surprise. "Accusation is a loud word. I do not accuse, I clarify." He turned then, finally letting his attention move from her to the table in front of him, where a candle waited like a servant who has learned the luxury of stillness. He held the paper over the light to see the fibers of it glow. He reached for the little pot of wax, and when the page brought it, he warmed it with patience. His patience sent the message that this was all simple, boring even, the work of keeping a large kindness intact. The room relaxed a fraction. Some shoulders freed themselves from tension into a posture of admiration. Some mouths prepared to smile again, the kind of smile a person uses to tell themselves that nothing serious ever happens during music. Don Alvaro stepped a little nearer to the edge of the circle, not to intervene, not yet, but to see the page of the world being turned. "You are young," the Count said to Isabella without looking away from the wax. "Youth errs. It is the first duty of age to forgive the theatre of youth." He placed a square of paper under the candle's nose, as if to let it smell approval, and to correct the accounts of the world so that theatre does not become governance. He pressed his signet ring into the melted wax. It was a practiced motion, and the room watched because it had been taught that such motions are sacred when performed by the right hands. He did not lift the ring at once. He let the wax hug it. Let the seal take its depth. Several nobles leaned in the way people lean over the shoulder of a painter, to admire work that will soon be displayed on a wall they will claim to love. Doña Beatriz looked at Isabella with a smile that seemed to say, "See how gracefully we are rescued from discomfort when we remember our places." Isabella did not look away. The ribbon at her waist pressed a little against her. She felt it the way you feel your own name when you hear it from across a field on a windy day. You are not sure whether to turn, but your body knows the sound. A few courtiers began to speak again in light threads of conversation, as people do when they have decided that the fragile thing on the table is not going to break. Someone asked someone else about the next dance. Someone laughed the kind of laugh a person uses to blink away a moment and place it in the shelf for later telling. Fray Tomas, who had come as the chaplain, accustomed to moving through all rooms like water, through different vessels, stood near enough to be within the circle of sight and far enough to be overlooked. He watched the ring, he watched the wax. He watched the small ceremony of authority being performed as a remedy to a sentence that was true and had been spoken by a person who did not own a room. The Count took his time. He lifted the ring at last, gently, to admire his seal impressed upon the soft substance that would harden and go wherever he commanded it to go. He looked pleased not with himself, but with the order of the world that allowed a man to do what he had just done and call it normal. He handed the sealed paper back to the usher with a brief nod. "See that this is taken to the office," he said. "We will be merciful in the morning." The usher bowed. The Count turned the moment into a lesson wrapped in kindness. To the room he said, "Forgive my attention to trifles. A house is kept by 1,000 gentle corrections." He glanced back at Isabella with a smile that was almost paternal. And small errors, if not corrected at once, become habits. Isabella felt heat at the base of her neck. It was not shame. It was a warning bell, the kind carried by shepherds in their pockets, that they shake when fog moves too quickly across a field. Don Alvaro cleared his throat once, softly, to see whether the sound could live in this air. He said in a tone that left no dent in anyone's pride, "My lord, may I ask, as a student of order, whether tenants named in such revisions are told what sum has been found and by what calculation? A man learns to admire good arithmetic when he is required to account for his own bread." The Count lifted an eyebrow. The question was not insolent. It was tidy. He responded in the language of courtesy that allows a rebuke to dress up as instruction. Of course, always the books are exact. He smiled, and the smile held a small edge. "I trust your family's ledgers are similarly admirable." "They are clear enough for daylight," Alvaro replied. A nobleman near him, hoping to be helpful, murmured that the young Vilena had a mind for numbers, as some younger sons do when they are given fewer horses to worry about. Doña Beatriz closed her fan with a soft click that sounded like the lid of a jewelry box. She proposed we all breathe, and someone laughed. The room seemed to agree. The distress would be folded away. The evening would be saved. Isabella looked at the Count and understood something that had not been spoken. His order had not been about a lesson. It had been about a list. Lists have a way of finding the names they want to find. She could feel her name standing in a doorway somewhere, ready to be chosen as an example of how gently power can place a hand on a shoulder and turn a person to face the wall. She wanted to say something, but there is a moment when words would give the room permission to call you ungracious. She did not want to hand them that word. She kept her jaw quiet. She let her eyes learn. The Count reached again for the sealed paper, as if a thought had occurred that would amuse the room if given a small flourish. He held the seal where the candle could kiss it once more without melting it. He said, with the air of a man proposing a toast that would cost no one anything at all, "We must be so precise, must we not? It would be wicked to threaten what has not been truly found. We must begin with one lease, as a study." Ah, he added a lightness to his tone that made the sentence harmless to those who were not inside it. "We shall review the Morales tenancy first." The seal hardened on the wax. The name Morales was spoken aloud. Dawn came without color, like a promise written in a careful hand. The farmyard woke not with roosters, but with the sound of feet finding shoes in the half-dark, and water poured from jar to basin. Lucia had already folded the cloths, already counted the oil left in the jar, already marked in her mind the small chores that make a day possible. Isabella stepped out with the broom and felt the air taste of stone that had slept. She reached for the gate. A paper touched the wood before her hand did. It had been pinned neatly, as though a man had done it with the same attention he used to fasten his own sleeve. The ink was dry. The words were patient. "Notice of revision," it said, in the language that turns a house into a ledger line. "Arrears discovered under the Morales tenancy. Access to certain privileges shall be reviewed." Lucia did not gasp. She put her palm flat to the page as if warmth could soften letters. Isabella read without moving her lips, because reading aloud would make the words belong to the air, and the air did not deserve them. "This is not the way," Lucia said quietly, "the way one points out that a bowl has been set where a bowl will be knocked. It should have been a visit, a conversation. If there was confusion, A man would have come to explain. The paper does not explain, Isabella said, because paper cannot listen. She wanted to take it down to save her mother from looking at it every time she crossed the gate, but she knew better than to deny what would not be denied. She traced the seal with the tip of her finger. The wax had taken the ring deeply. It was proud of itself. "We will go to market," Lucia said. "The steward must be there. He will talk when he is among people." Market felt like a place where the world remembered itself. Stalls, voices, the old argument between price and need. On days when money was thin, kindness became a currency, and most people had some to spend. Isabella tied her apron with the red ribbon that had belonged to her grandmother. It had a bit of a shine left in it if you looked from an angle. She told herself it was only a ribbon, not an omen. They walked the familiar road, not fast. When your roof has been touched on paper, it does not fall in an hour. The olive trees along the path stood like elders who did not speak unless asked. The city was awake in its own way, with shutters raised like eyelids and doorsteps swept in strokes that pushed away yesterday. The steward stood under the awning of a cloth seller, because stewards know how to borrow shade and position. He saw them. He saw the paper in their posture. He arranged his face into a form of sympathy that did not require action. "Good morning, Doña Lucia," he said, because she was a woman of years, and to the girl a nod, because girls are expected to make bows with their presence. Lovely day for oranges. He fingered a fruit that was not his, to show he was untroubled. "Sir?" Lucia said, and the word sir was a straight line, no bend in it. "There is a notice upon our gate." He smiled the way a man smiles when a child shows him a broken toy. "Ah, those. Routine, I assure you. The Count is only keeping good accounts. It is a health for all when sums are correct. Sometimes in the keeping of lands, small errors accumulate like dust." He made a brushing gesture with his fingers, polite dusting. "What error?" Isabella asked. The steward tilted his head as if thinking about whether the sun would warm the day by noon. A matter of measures on the press, perhaps, or a tithe delivered on a day different from the day recorded. "We must not make a festival of it. Bring your questions in writing, and the office will be pleased to schedule a review." A man at the neighboring stall pretended not to listen, as people do when they wish to be kind and cannot find a way to be brave. A woman buying onions reached for extra coins, then changed her mind because pity must be secret if it wishes to be useful. Isabella felt the ribbon at her waist press into her fingers where she had tucked the knot. She thought of the night at the palace and the laugh that had tried to make her ribs into a cage. She said with a courtesy that did not borrow anything from fear, "May we see the ledger where the error appears and the hand that wrote it?" The steward's smile held. "The ledgers are kept correct," he said, as if that were the same as saying they could be seen. "We cannot open them in the market as if they were fruit. There is an order to things." He looked at the people nearby, inviting them to agree that order is the name of what protects them from chaos. Doña Beatriz appeared as though she had risen from the shade itself, a figure who knows exactly how big her outline is in the eyes of others. She carried no basket. She carried attention. "Good morning," she said to the crowd in general and the women in particular, because women keep the story of a city in their sleeves. "What pretty onions! What fine bread! And you, steward, doing your work in a place where everyone can admire it." "We came to ask for clarity," Lucia said. The notice was not clear. "Clarity is our dearest wish," Doña Beatriz answered, "for nothing makes a house shine like it." She placed one finger to her cheek and addressed the steward as if prompting a child. "Perhaps a beginning could be made by requesting a few household details. Some matters are delicate, yes? Better handled in a quiet room than in a street where words turn into feathers and fly to places they were not meant to see." "We have no words that cannot be said in the street," Isabella replied softly. "Ah, but others might," said Doña Beatriz, and her eyes rested on Lucia with a pity so smooth it might have been carved. "Tell me, good mother, would you favor us by coming to the palace office this afternoon? We can settle the small points in the comfort of chairs and ink that does not spill." "Why only my mother?" Isabella asked. "Because mothers keep the keys," Doña Beatriz said, as if explaining a game. "We must respect that." She adjusted her glove at the wrist, which gave the steward time to nod at the right moment. "Do not be troubled. This touches no one's honor. It is all bread and figures." "We will go together," Lucia said. "The office sometimes finds it easier to speak with one voice," Doña Beatriz replied, in the tone that says this is consideration, not constraint. "Too many voices make music. We are not in a hall." She smiled at the market women so that their kindness would become her audience. A murmur moved through the stalls. People rearranged their hands, their baskets, their gazes. Suspicion stands around improvisations like a fence. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve, asking for a fig. The mother said no without looking, because she was counting the meaning inside a polite suggestion. Don Alvaro stepped from the far side of the bread seller's table, where he had been choosing loaves by weight, not glaze. He had listened without pretending otherwise. He bowed to Lucia as to a lady of a house, then to Isabella as to a witness whose word he would respect in a chamber. "Steward," he said, his tone carrying an ordinary courtesy, "when such notices are posted, is it not usual to note the sum alleged and the rule under which the sum was calculated?" The steward smiled at him as one smiles at a helpful nephew. "Of course, in the fullness of time, the office will provide all that is needed." "And the hearing before the corregidor," Alvaro continued, still mild, "is it not also customary when a tenancy is questioned, so that both sides can place their figures and their recollections where a bench can see them?" Doña Beatriz's fan opened like a lily. How diligent our young men are, always attentive to forms. She tilted the fan to hide the lower half of her face as if she needed shade for her thoughts. "The bench is attentive when the matter is large. When the matter is small, we kindly spare the bench the burden." "The bench is not burdened by justice," Alvaro said, and whoever was near enough to hear him straightened a little, because the sentence held a weight that asked to be carried well. "It is strengthened by practice. If there is nothing to fear in the ledgers, then light will only make them handsomer." He spoke as one who has had to carry the weight of a thing without making others carry it. He left room for dignity to stand with him rather than behind him. Isabella looked at him and felt her breath settle. She had not come to find an ally in a market, but there he stood, quiet as a rule that had not been applied in a long time, and suddenly was remembered. Doña Beatriz answered with a careful nod. "Your zeal honors you. I will make the request." She looked toward the steward, and the look was an instruction dressed as affection. "Draft an appointment. A review can be scheduled before the bench, since we are all so earnest this morning." "Thank you," Isabella said, not to flatter, but because gratitude is the oil that keeps doors from making a noise when opened. Then she turned to the steward. "Please write the sum in question and the days that have been miswritten, so we can bring our own memory to match yours." The steward looked as though a small pebble had entered his shoe. He did not limp. He bowed. "As you wish." The rumor came like a wind that forgot it was not invited. It traveled from mouth to ear across the market, with the speed that only simple fictions own. A girl was heard to have taken a cup at the feast, a cup of wine not meant for her hand, perhaps two. Perhaps she sang a little. The story grew plumage. It was offered and accepted because it saved those who had cheered the count from the trouble of thinking. Isabella heard it without being told. Rumor has a way of turning heads in a certain rhythm, and she knew that rhythm. She took a breath that did not tremble, and she steadied the tray on a nearby stall, though she was not carrying anything. She stepped into the path of the spreading tale, and spoke as one speaks to a neighbor leaning on a fence. "I did not take a cup." A plump man selling olives lifted both hands as if to say he had not accused. "No one said you did. We only wondered." "Wondering is a kind of building," she replied. "It uses material it did not pay for." The market fell quiet for a beat, because the sentence had the sound of a proverb, without the furniture of one. Doña Beatriz touched the steward's sleeve lightly. She arranged her smile, the way a seamstress pinches fabric to try a pattern. "We must be gentle with words," she told the heir. "They bruise easily." Then, more brightly, "Address your energy to the appointment, good man. Let the people see our fairness." She turned to Lucia. "Dear woman, do bring your household papers. It helps the bench to admire neatness." "We have neatness," Lucia said. "It is what keeps the walls standing." A boy pushed past them carrying a crate full of lemons, too heavy for his small arms. The corner of the crate caught the edge of Isabella's apron, just where the red ribbon made its knot. The ribbon pulled. It tore. The sound was thin, but the sound mattered. She put a hand to it, not out of vanity, but because a ribbon is a promise to yourself that you are tied to what you have chosen. She held the torn piece in her fingers. The rest of the ribbon still held her apron, crooked now. She could have let it fall. She chose not to. "Keep it," Lucia said gently, "not as a relic, as a reminder." Isabella folded the torn piece and slipped it into her palm. She felt the smallness of it, the way a person feels the weight of a coin and knows what bread it could become if used wisely. Don Alvaro had watched the crate with the attention of someone who has carried his share of things that did not fit the shape of his hands. He turned to the boy. "That is heavy. Do you have help?" "My cousin is ill," the boy said, as if explanation made strength possible. He lifted his chin. "I will walk with you to the next turn," Alvaro said. "The distance is short, but it is long enough for me to feel I have done something useful this morning." He looked back at Lucia and Isabella with a nod that respect puts on when it is not dressed up for a court. "May I call upon you before the hearing to see if there is any way to make your papers ready in the form the bench prefers?" "You may," Lucia replied, "and thank you for being plain." "Plainness is all I have enough of," he said, with a half-smile that did not ask to be admired. As he moved away with the boy, the market breathed again. People resumed the small barter that is life. Yet each person carried the knowledge that a notice on a gate can be a kind of weather, and that weather can change a season. Isabella gathered the items they had come to buy and put back the items they could no longer afford. She chose fewer onions, more flour. She chose what would keep. She did not explain her choices to anyone. She did not apologize for them. When a woman begins to apologize to the heir becomes a tyrant. On the way home, they stopped at the parish door. Fray Tomas was there, as he often was on market mornings, speaking to a pair of old men about the price of candles and the way sore knees make a person notice the holiness of benches. He saw Lucia. He saw Isabella. He saw something between them that was not words. "Father," Lucia said, "a notice has been placed on our gate. We would be grateful for your counsel." "Counsel is only bread if it is shared," he replied. He invited them inside, not into a confessional, which feels like a punishment for telling the truth, but into the small room where the parish keeps its lists of who needs what and who has given what to whom. He closed the door softly because doors are instruments that must be played with care. "Tell me," he said. And they did. He listened with the posture of someone who believes that listening is a work that changes the shape of a day. He asked 2 questions, not to satisfy curiosity, but to find the threads in the heap. When they had finished, he said, "The bench may see what the bench is shown. It is right to ask to speak there. I can send a note to the abbess. The convent keeps tidy copies of the tithe lists because women do not forget what they give or what they are owed. If some entry has shifted like a stone in a path, perhaps there is a record of the path before it shifted." "Thank you," Isabella said. The ribbon in her palm felt warmer now, as if truth had hands. "There is something else," Fray Tomas said gently. "In matters like this, the first blow is often to the page. The second is to the story. The market will be asked to hold a version that makes it easier for some to sleep. Remember that sleep does not vote in the morning. People do. Stand in the same place each time you speak, and you will be a landmark, not a rumor." "We will stand at the bench," Lucia said. He smiled, a small pleased thing, as though someone had arranged the candles exactly as he had hoped. "I will bring what copies I can to the door of the hearing, if the abbess agrees, and I will speak to the clerk about the form. He likes forms. It is a harmless love and can be useful. They left with lighter steps than any news would have justified. When you are given a line to follow, the road stops feeling like a flood." Back at the gate, the notice did not look smaller. It did not change its ink because they had been busy, but it seemed less like a door that could not be opened and more like a board that could be lifted if one knew where the nails were. Isabella tied her apron again with what remained of the ribbon. The knot was awkward. She left it that way. She went to the press to see what could be mended while men sorted paper. Lucia went to the chest where their documents lay. She laid them out on the table like a mother places clothes for a journey. When she went to lift the jug of water, her hands did not shake. She had a task. A neighbor came to the gate with a loaf. She did not say why she had brought it, because it is not elegant to notice another's trouble. She talked about the weather, about a cousin's new child, about the price of soap. Then she left the bread and the conversation at the same time, as if the two were braided. By afternoon, the sun had learned to be warm. The yard hoped to be ordinary. A pigeon examined the roof as if considering it for a sermon. Then footsteps came down the lane, measured, official, not hurried. Official feet never hurry. They make the world come to them. 2 palace officers stood at the gate, not draped in threat, but in neat coats and gloves that said they were careful with their hands. Behind them, a clerk unrolled a small, tidily tied packet. He bowed with the exactness of a man who knows how far his respect is meant to travel. He had a way of holding his chin that told the air he had come to conduct a ceremony, not a quarrel. "Good day to this house," the senior officer said. "What can we do for you?" Lucia asked, standing between the gate and the room where the papers were laid out. Her voice was not raised. It did not need to be. "We bring a warrant for the review of accounts," the officer answered. He took the paper from the clerk with fingers that had been taught how to handle authority without creasing it. He did not wave it. He read aloud the parts that were meant to be heard in yards and kitchens, the way a bell is rung to gather people without shouting. As he spoke, Isabella noticed the seal. It had been pressed a little too deep, the way a man presses his authority when he wishes to leave a mark on wax and on memory. The wax had taken the detail with appetite. The clerk handed the second sheet. It held a name that was not Isabella's. It was not hers to carry, yet it rested against her throat like a weight. It said in the same tidy script as the notice on the gate, "Lucia Morales is summoned to appear alone." The paper named Lucia alone, as if a house could be reduced to a single voice. The officer folded the warrant with care and waited in the yard, leaving the weight of it on the table without touching the documents spread there. The clerk's eyes did a small round trip over the neat stacks and came back to the seal as if to confirm his own importance. The day had grown warm enough that the wax might have softened if left too near the sun, but they did not leave it. They made ceremony of everything, even shade. "Must I go without my daughter?" Lucia asked. Not in fear, but as one tests a cord before crossing a river. The officer kept his face arranged properly. "The summons names only you, madam. It is an easy matter. We wish to avoid crowding. The office is small." "Small is a kind of choice," Isabella said, and her hand found the knot of the ribbon at her waist, now tied with an awkwardness she refused to hide. "My mother does not deal in secrets. If questions concern our household, I may answer what she does not remember." The clerk smiled a professional smile. "We prefer to hear one voice at a time. It keeps the page tidy." "The page will be tidy," Lucia said. "It is the room that worries me." He blinked, perhaps unused to being answered in sentences that did not ask permission. The officer cleared his throat, and the apology in his glance toward Lucia was real and brief, as apologies are when a man is between his job and his human sense. "We can wait a short while if you wish to find a neighbor to sit with your door. It is better," he added, "that your daughter remain here to mind the house." It would be better, Isabella thought, for those who write notices if the girl who said no would be separated from the woman who taught her how to mean it. She felt the truth of that thought, like a small coin in her pocket she was not ready to spend. "I will come," Lucia said, "but I will not sign anything without counsel." "Counsel?" The clerk's pen made a tiny twitch, the kind a bird's head makes when it hears a crumb fall. "You are at liberty to ask a priest to bless your day, of course." "She meant," said a quiet voice at the gate, "that counsel includes understanding what a line means before one is asked to place a hand beneath it." Fray Tomas stood there, without making a scene of arriving. He had the sort of presence that sat well in any doorway, and doors did not resent him for using them. "Father," Lucia said. "Good day, officers," the priest continued, with a nod that neither praised nor challenged. "I often walk with people when they are invited to conduct business in rooms that are not theirs. It keeps the steps even." The officer bowed. The clerk said that would be unnecessary. He used the word kindly. It did not change the word. "We would be glad of your company, Father," Lucia replied. Isabella took up the folded letters that proved their payments and the small notebook she kept like a shadow of the house. She put them back down. The paper they wanted was named after her mother, not her. She could not carry someone else's name into a room without being accused of daring that name to be weak. She watched them go down the lane, the officer's stride measured, the clerk's careful, her mother's steady. Fray Tomas matched their pace as if the ground belonged to their agreement, rather than to the seal in the officer's pocket. When they turned toward the city, the noon light made them look smaller. She felt that smaller shape land in her chest and make a place for itself. The house looked back at her. The jug, the hearth, the press, the table with its straight legs. Everything willing to be as ordinary as it had been yesterday, when the only questions that mattered were about wheat and weather and oil. She straightened the stack of papers she was not allowed to bring. She made the bed that would not be slept in for some hours. She wrapped bread in cloth the way her mother did it, with a fold that kept the crust from hardening. Then she could not stand being quiet any longer. She went to the parish again, feet remembering the way without help. The door was unlatched for air. Inside, a candlestick had been moved to the left, and she moved it back, not because it must be there, but because doing it gave her hands a job that did not depend on anyone's permission. A young woman from the next street over was kneeling, counting prayers with her fingers. Isabella stepped past softly and found the room where the parish kept its lists. A boy copying figures looked up, startled, ink on his thumb. "Is father here?" The boy shook his head. "Palace office, with your mother," he pointed, though directions do not help when someone is where you cannot go. "Is there anyone who can tell me what is written when people like us are named in ledgers?" she asked. The boy smiled, that quick, grateful smile of someone who is pleased to be useful. "The convent keeps everything," he said. He meant the convent keeps it like a mother keeps a cupboard, full of exactly what you remember and some things you did not know you would need. The abbess likes to be asked. She says order is a song you must sing right, or else it becomes noise. He colored at having said it as if it were his own thought. Isabella thanked him and turned toward the door. He called after her without meaning to be bold. "The path along the wall is cooler. The lane will cook you." She took the cooler path. It led along stone that had known many hands and had learned not to tell secrets even when pressed. The convent gates were open enough to suggest welcome and closed enough to teach respect. She tugged the bell, which sounded like a spoon tapped against clay. A voice from inside asked who called. "Isabella Morales from the Morales tenancy under the Count's patronage," she answered, "because we learned to count ourselves by the names others used to call us. I seek the abbess if she has a breath to spare." The porter, a woman with kind eyebrows and practical hands, let her in and led her through the cool corridors. The walls kept their voices low. Even so, one could hear a sheaf of paper being turned by another pair of hands somewhere, and the quiet started to teach her how to keep her own movements small without making them weak. The abbess was a woman whose face had grown into her office, not stern, not soft, set like a seal that had been pressed correctly. She greeted Isabella by standing, which erases many differences before one word is spoken. "Father Tomas sent word your house might knock," she said, as if messages could walk ahead of their senders. "Sit. Tell me what breathes in your chest," Isabella told her, with no ornament. She used the words the paper had used, and the words the market had used, and the words she herself had held back in the hall. The abbess listened like a steward of a different kind of wealth, a wealth made of time and quiet attention. "We keep tithe lists," the abbess said, "because charity has a memory and she relies on us to keep it sharper than the people who rely on her. Those lists are not crowns. They are witnesses. Sometimes when people make numbers do tricks, the lists say no." She rose and went to a cabinet with careful hinges, took out a bundle wrapped in linen, and brought it to the table. Her hands did not shake. She had been trusted by papers for too many years to be nervous now. "We will not let the originals go wandering," she said, "but copies have feet. If your case will be heard, these feet may be asked to walk there." A novice entered with a lamp that burned steadier than outside light. The abbess nodded to the lamp. "Place it there. Candles know how to stand when truth must be seen." The novice set the flame where it could show ink without flattery. Isabella bent over the columns and saw, for the first time, the city the way numbers see it. Names, quantities, dates that turn people into patterns. She traced her finger along entries that involved her neighbors, her household, the granary, the poor box. There were days when grain left the granary and days when it returned. There were marks where it ought to sit heavier, and instead it seemed to fly. On certain weeks, the abbess said, the poor were told not to come because no measures remained. On those same weeks, another page shows the tithe collected as if it had doubled. I did not know how the two truths could hold the same bench. I thought perhaps I had lost a day in my mind. But I do not lose days. She tapped the column lightly. Isabella's breath slowed to match the lamp's steady pulse. "May I copy these?" "You may," the abbess said. "Not all, only what touches your house and the neighboring entries that speak to the same days. We do not fight a cloud with a book, but we show where the path goes wrong." She called for parchment, a fine reed pen, and sand. She also sent word to a lay sister who kept the convent's accounts. "She will watch our eyes, too many eyes make ink jealous." As they began, the porter returned to the room. "A gentleman waits at the gate. He says he comes as a friend of the Morales house, and his hat tells the same story. He knows a priest. Should I send him away to keep our silence taut?" The abbess did not disapprove of a smile on her own mouth. Silence is more elastic than people think. Let him in if he will whisper. Don Alvaro de Villena entered without letting his boots tell the floor who he was. He bowed to the abbess as if she were the queen of this building, which she was. He greeted Isabella the way one greets a person one has met under heat and finds again in shade. "I went to your door," he said softly, "and the boy by the parish guided me here by the short street. I hope I do not disturb the good order." The abbess gestured to a chair. "You disturb nothing you do not improve by removing it. Sit. If your eyes are true, you may look. If they are not, the lamp will find you out." Alvaro looked like a man who would not dare to fail in front of such a lamp. He sat, took the copy pen when offered, and watched the numbers until they made sense. He did not rush. He matched dates at a pace that allowed trust to form in the small ease between lines. "These marks," he said after a time, "indicate deliveries from the granary noted in the count's steward's hand. Then, on the bishop's day, the tithe measured was less than half what was due, yet the account shows a full measure given. The poor list shows names sent away. Who signed these tallies?" "A clerk's initials," the abbess said. The seal was pressed to the summary. Alvaro frowned, not like a lord who has been contradicted, but like a man who finds a knot in a rope that has kept a bridge up. The seal appears on days when nothing required it. Someone wished to marry the appearance of law to an absence of grain. It is a habit of people who know that eyes admire wax more than ink. Isabella copied an entry that touched the week when her mother had begged flour from a neighbor, and returned it the next day out of pride. The ledger showed no gap then. The next week, a sudden increase of arrears sat heavy on their line. It was the kind of trick that steals exactly as much as a person cannot prove. She felt the knowledge settle without rage, like a stake placed in the ground to mark a place for building. "We will need a formal petition to the corregidor," she said. "If we ask as beggars, we will be given charity and called content. If we ask as tenants, we will be given a hearing and called troublesome. But I would rather be troublesome in daylight." Alvaro raised his eyes to her face and nodded. "I will draft it in the form that cannot be refused, without requiring the bench to explain why it refuses. Explanations do not like to be seen naked." He glanced at the abbess. "With your leave, I will cite the practice of sanctuary and the convent's record as basis for the court's interest." "You have my leave and my satisfaction," the abbess said. She called for her lay sister to supply the proper phrases. Men love phrases. They carry them like talismans. The work of copying slowed time until the sun forgot where it meant to be. The lamp did not flicker. A small breeze pressed against the window and thought better of it. Isabella's hand, unused to ink for so long, cramped. She shook it out, which made a tiny, shapeless blot on the margin. She covered it with the tip of her finger and breathed. "Do you need rest?" Alvaro asked, the question naked of gallantry. "No," she said. "I need to finish." She smiled. A small thing, not an invitation, only a proof that she was more metal than glass. He smiled in answer without showing teeth, as if acknowledging that she had set a pace, and he intended to keep it. He traced the letters of a name on a copy he made, P.D., and looked up at the abbess. "This clerk, does he belong to the palace or to the town?" "To the palace office," she said. "He comes here sometimes to admire our lists and to flatter their straightness. The flattery is very kind. He does not ask to help carry sacks. He will prefer to be seen as harmless," Alvaro murmured. "Men who press seals too deeply always do. It is their coat." A bell rang somewhere in the building, not loudly, the kind that says a meal is ready or a prayer is beginning. The abbess lifted her head. "We will go to chapel to agree with God about what is true," she said. "You may continue here without us. We trust you because the lamp has not wavered." When the sisters had gone, the quiet grew into a person, and sat with them. Isabella dipped the pen and the scratch sounded like slow rain. She remembered to sprinkle sand to settle the ink. She thought of her mother in a small chair under a large window at the palace office, and wanted to be a door standing between her and anything that wished to press her thin. Alvaro set aside the copy he had just made and looked at her hand. "May I bind your fingers for a moment with linen? It will help the ache to behave. A soldier taught me that ink is a kind of work that also blisters." She extended her hand. He wrapped the linen with the practice of someone who has bound other people without making their pain louder. His fingers were warm, not important. He tied the end neatly so it would not hinder the pen. "There. I claim no genius in knots, but this one will not mock you." "Thank you," she said. She wanted to mention the night at the palace, not to create a romance from a courtesy, but to name the fact that he had chosen to stand where people could see him and not took advantage of being invisible. She did not speak of it. She dipped the pen and continued. When the abbess returned, she brought with her a small plate with figs and almonds. "You will not carry a straight line if you are faint," she said. "Eat. Truth is not helped by hunger." They ate as people do whose minds are elsewhere. The sugar in the figs made the ink smell sweeter. The almonds put a little strength in their fingers. The abbess cut a fig for herself, then for Isabella, and then for Alvaro, the opposite of the order the city expected. He noticed. He did not preen. He accepted the lesson. A slow step sounded in the corridor. It was not the quick foot of the porter, nor the light foot of the novice. It was a man who has chosen to walk without announcing himself, and cannot escape the seriousness in his own heels. Doña Beatrice's voice preceded her by a breath, instructing the air to compose itself. She entered, not shy of the threshold. "Sister," she said, and her nod acknowledged the abbess's authority, even while her eyes tried to place a rope around it. "I have come to ensure we are not wasting anyone's goodwill. A hearing may not be necessary if we speak calmly." The abbess gestured to a chair. "Calm is the only language we speak." Isabella kept her gaze on the page, the way one looks at a river to avoid noticing who stands on the far bank. She finished the line, sanded it, and lifted her hand. Doña Beatriz observed the copies. How industrious. She smiled to include everyone. And how unfortunate. Papers have a way of thinking they are important simply because they exist. She helped herself to a fig without asking, a little test. She chewed politely and then continued. "There is a tone one may use before a bench that makes the bench kinder. I hope you will choose it. Softness invites softness. Is softness the tone that was used when the notice named only my mother?" Isabella asked without raising her voice. "Or the tone that spoke my name in the hall and asked for my gratitude as a public entertainment?" The fan opened with a sound like a breath swallowed the wrong way. "My dear," the Count was making light of a heavy moment. "We all must sometimes rescue a room." "I do not wish to be a room that needs rescuing," Isabella said. Alvaro placed his copy aside and folded his hands. "Doña Beatriz, if the bench is to do nothing, let it be because we were mistaken, not because we were quiet." He turned his head by a degree toward Isabella. "She will not be less plain because a lady politely asks her to be quieter. Neither will I." Doña Beatriz's smile gathered itself at the corners. "Men are sometimes forgiven for being plain," she said. "Women less so." The abbess set her fig down. "Women are forgiven for being right when they have their papers in order." She lifted a sheaf with precise fingers. "And perhaps when their cause is blessed." The doorframe collected the moment the way a stick gathers a spider's web, a pause that asked everyone to name themselves. Then Doña Beatriz stood. "I will not be the villain in this story," she said lightly, "to no one in particular and to everyone at once. I will ensure the request for a hearing is delivered." She touched the copies with a fingertip that came back clean. "Be wise when you speak. The bench likes its food chopped small." She left before anyone could place another sentence on her shoulders. The porter's steps resumed their quickness, as if relieved to be allowed to be themselves again. The abbess exhaled through her nose, the only sign that temper is not a quality God removed from her when she took her vows. She looked at Isabella, then at Alvaro. "You are both correct to stand the way you stand. Now we give the city's habit a chance to behave." Alvaro reached for the petition draft he had begun, sharpened his reed, and wrote the salutation as neat as a man who believes letters should carry respect without kneeling. He included the convent's roll. He included the habit of the office to press seals too often. He asked not for mercy but for method. The light shifted. The lamp held steady. The copies accumulated to a slim stack that felt like a wall when held properly. They reviewed the dates once more and agreed on what they did not know, so that they would not be surprised into saying more than they believed. When there was nothing left to add that would not be decoration, they set the pen down. "What will your mother be told?" the abbess asked. "What suits the seals," Isabella said, "that she is trouble, that her daughter is worse, that we are careless with accounts and bold with words." She kept her tone even. She would not dress worry in drama. A soft knock at the outer door sounded like the last sentence of a letter. The porter appeared with a folded note. "From the palace office," she said, "for sister or for the young woman. It did not know which of you was more dangerous." The abbess took it, broke the wax and read. Her face did not change. She passed it to Isabella. The script praised Lucia's cooperation and requested her signature on a prepared correction at dawn. It promised leniency for promptness and confusion for delay. It advised her not to involve herself in legal matters beyond her understanding, as that would only embarrass her. Isabella inhaled. The breath touched the place inside her, where her ribbon lay folded. She tucked the note under the copies and looked at Alvaro. He held her gaze and did not hurry to speak for her. She found her voice without help. "We will see the bench." "You will," the abbess agreed. She called for the porter. "Send a boy to the corregidor's office with our letter. Ask for the clerk who disdains messy petitions. He will prefer ours. He likes ink that shapes itself." The boy, who had ink on his thumb earlier, appeared as if called by his own future. He took the letters carefully, tucked them into a leather folder, and looked like a colt who had just been told he would run for a purpose other than his own delight. He left, steps eager, then corrected himself, and walked with dignity because he had seen it done. Waiting grew long legs and sat down again. The sun moved to the other side of the courtyard. The lamp continued to insist on steadiness. A bell marked the hour when the city begins to smell of suppers. The abbess's lay sister shuffled one set of papers and put them to bed. The porter came and went. No one talked about outcomes. It is a superstition among people who often hold breath. If you name the thing you need, it might crumble into things you cannot use. Alvaro rose, paced once to loosen his knees, and sat again. He spoke low for her only. "If the bench refuses, I will carry these to the royal auditor at his next visit. It will shame the town to take a matter up past it, and I will be called the wrong kind of loyal, but I do not mind the name." "We will not borrow trouble," she answered. "We have enough to feed tonight." The door opened. The boy stood there, flushed but composed. He did not enter. He held the threshold as if it were a drum he must beat only once. He lifted his hand, and in it was a folded reply, wax still warm enough to smell faintly sweet. The porter took it and gave it to the abbess. The abbess did not hurry. She thumbed the seal to test its truth, then opened with the care she gave all things that would soon be called evidence. Her eyes moved, then lifted. "A messenger arrives with a reply from the corregidor. He will hear them today." The corridor outside the audience chamber smelled of wax and linen, the smells of rooms that pretend to be calm. People arranged themselves along the walls as if they were part of the furniture and wished to prove their usefulness. The porter from the convent carried the folder like a reliquary. The abbess did not come in person. Her letter came in her stead, sealed with the modest stamp of her office and the authority of years. Isabella stood with her mother and Fray Tomas. She felt the torn piece of ribbon in her palm, folded twice, a small square of resolve. Don Alvaro came last, so he would not seem eager, and bowed to Lucia as if greeting the host of a gathering. He spoke low to Isabella. "The petitions are in the form the bench prefers. No flourish, exact names, dates that do not argue among themselves." "Thank you," she said. Her voice did not know how to be smaller than the truth it carried. A clerk called the room to order with the tone of a man who had taught many rooms to behave. The corregidor entered. He was not magnificent. He was spare, careful, the sort of man whose chair made sense under him. He took his seat and looked around at the people, not past them. When he spoke, his voice did not try to be wise. It tried to be heard. "We are gathered to consider a question of entries in accounts that affect the tenancy of one house, and by extension, the harvest of a small field. We will proceed with courtesy, because courtesy keeps the weather fair in small rooms. He glanced at the door where the steward waited. Call the parties named. The Count of Aragon appeared with neat steps, not late, not early. Light found his ring and greeted it as an old friend. He inclined his head to the bench. He inclined it to the room. He inclined it to the idea of order itself. He was accompanied by Doña Beatriz, whose fan rested closed. A sword in a sheath that would never be drawn, because it was too well known to require drawing. Behind them stood a clerk, with a face people forget on purpose. Lucia and Isabella entered together. They did not whisper as they passed through the doorway. Whispering makes witnesses sound like rumors. They stood where they were told to stand and did not ask to sit. The corregidor signaled. Begin with the office. The palace clerk stepped forward and made a small bow to the bench. He spoke as if he had memorized his words, which he had. In the course of routine review, we found discrepancies in the Morales tenancy. Several measures of grain were unaccounted for in the ledger. A tithe was delayed and recorded improperly. Notices were sent, as proper. A correction was prepared, as merciful practice. The clerk smiled, as if his mouth were paid to contain reassurance. The bench asked, "Show the ledger." A copy was presented, its pages neat as a soldier on inspection. The clerk pointed, here and here. He spoke with a finger that knew how to accuse politely. The steward nodded in the right places, like a man agreeing with a bell. The corregidor turned his head slightly. Notices were posted yesterday? At dawn, my lord. And the hearing today? At your command. The corregidor did not reward obedience. He turned to Isabella. Does this house have something to place before the bench? We do, she replied. We have copies from the convent's tithe lists for the weeks in question. We have our own record of deliveries and returns. We have the name of a carter who took grain on days when the poor were told not to come. We have the seal that appears on summaries when it need not be there. Her hands did not shake when she held the folder. She offered the papers to the clerk of the bench, whose duty it was to receive without comment. He carried them to the corregidor, who held the abbess's letter up to the light as if the paper might glow with the way it had been folded. The corregidor read quickly. He did not let his face flatter or accuse the words. He laid the letter beside the ledger and placed his hand upon both, as if to keep the wind from inventing anything. We will hear from the convent's representative later, he said. For now, tell me what your copies show that the palace ledger does not. Isabella did not make a speech. She made a path. She pointed to dates the way a person points to stones that keep a traveller's feet out of water. On these days, the granary recorded deliveries that did not reach the poor list. On these days, the poor list shows names crossed out. On this day, our tithe was weighed, and the measure reads whole, yet the summary claims only a half measure supplied and a half measure owing, which was then put as arrears upon our line the following week. She paused. The seal appears on the summary. It does not appear on the daily entry. The seal belongs to one ring. The room listened like a child told a story that might have a wolf but has not yet been introduced to it. Eyes moved from the paper to the ring on the Count's hand. The Count's smile did not vanish. It adjusted itself, the way a gentleman adjusts his cuffs when the weather changes. The steward was called to speak. He did so with the energy of a man who trusts routine to carry him across a thin bridge. We have many entries. We are only human. Errors occur, especially among the poor, who do not often bring their sums to the office in a neat hand. We correct those errors as kind men do. He said kind men as if the words were mutually affectionate. Kindness does not appear as arrears on a woman's door, said the corregidor not unkindly, and the steward's mouth closed like a purse. Call the carter, the bench said. A man entered who had learned to carry weight with his shoulders and to place it down without noise. He was given his place. He spoke in few words, because carting teaches a rhythm that does not fit fancy. He described the route he took on the days named. He described the empty return on days when the lists told the poor not to come. He described the man who signed for the deliveries and the late hour at which he signed. His voice did not try to be bigger than itself. Do you know the seal? Asked the bench. No, my lord. I know the hand that makes me wait. It is the hand that keeps the wax close and the grain farther. He stepped back. He was relieved not to be asked to be a hero. He had performed a simpler act, being precise. Doña Beatriz rose at last. She addressed the bench, not the room. Always a good house keeps its entries neat. The Count is a good house, we all know it. If a seal appears where a seal need not be, perhaps it is zeal to prevent cheating. Fashion has lately made insolence appear smarter than obedience. I hope we resist that fashion here. Her voice rested on words like obedience as if on cushions. Isabella looked at her, and for a heartbeat thought of the night at the palace when the goblet broke, and the Count's laughter tried to glue it back with etiquette. She did not speak to Doña Beatriz. She spoke to the bench. We do not ask to shame a house, we ask to keep our own. If the entries were true, there would be no need for seals pressed so deep that the wax remembers the ring better than the ink remembers the grain. The corregidor shifted the papers for a clearer view. He turned to Fray Thomas. Father, your parish has dealings with the convent lists? We do. The poor come to us when the convent's door is too far. We measure our candles. We count our crumbs. We can tell when a number is wearing a borrowed coat. The weeks named by the young woman felt thin. Bread came back to be blessed twice because it had been promised once and then taken. The bench nodded. He raised a hand to the palace clerk. Who pressed these seals? The clerk spread his fingers as if to show they were clean. The Count's ring was used, my lord, when summaries were prepared. It is custom. Custom is a cloak that fits many shoulders, the bench replied. He leaned toward the Count. My lord, you wish to speak. The Count did not rush. He never did. He let the air wait for him. Then he rose with the sort of gravity that assures a room it has not wasted its time. The Count of Aragon is always at the service of order, he began. If entries were made that confused charity with arrears, it is regrettable. He allowed the word regrettable to soften the edges of everything else. My house holds the poor in stewardship. No one will be turned out on a whim. He looked at Isabella with generous detachment. If this young woman has stirred us to more careful keeping of sums, then let us reward her with a better balance. But let us not turn a lesson into a spectacle. He placed his hand briefly over the seal on the table, a quiet assertion that authority is by nature a calm thing. The room relaxed, trained as it was to take generosity when it was offered and call it noble. The bench did not relax. He looked down again at the column of dates. He traced a finger along the space between the convent's entries and the palace ledger. We will hear the convent's letter, he said. The porter approached with a steadiness that respects importance without falling in love with it. He gave the letter to the clerk of the bench, who read at the corregidor's request. It stated simple things with simple sentences. It named the weeks when the poor were turned away for want of measure. It described the copy practice of the convent, that long habit that keeps memory from becoming a rumor. It asked the bench to compare illumination with shadow. When it was finished, the room did not know whether to nod or to find a cough. The bench nodded for them. He looked to the young woman. Isabella Morales, will you speak on your own behalf? She did not step forward. She did not need to. She allowed her voice to carry itself. Our field is small, my lord. Our oil press does not boast. We have paid what was owed when it was owed. We have accepted help when we failed, and returned it the next day when we had enough to do so. If we are made to carry debt that belongs to someone else's hand, we will lose more than a field. We will lose the truth we have kept between ourselves and God. She breathed once. The breath steadied the lamp of her voice. We do not ask to be admired. We ask not to be miscounted. She could feel the hall hold still. The Count studied her as if the shape of her words could be pressed into a ring and worn. The bench addressed the clerk, who took delivery on the days in question. The clerk named a junior official. His initials matched the ones Alvaro had traced. The bench requested that he be brought. He was not present. A runner was sent. The correcting of rooms requires messengers. While they waited, the bench turned to Alvaro. Don de Villena, your petition bears your hand. Do you ask for your own sake or as a student of order? Alvaro bowed the sort of bow that keeps a spine unbroken. For the sake of order, my lord, which is my own sake and everyone's. He did not add more. The sentence sat on the table like a cup that will not chip. The junior official arrived, surprised by the size of the room he had entered. He was shown the entries, the summaries, the seal. He stammered, not because he was evil, but because he had learned a habit and now was asked to name it as habit while the room listened. He named the days he had signed. He named the hour. He named the man who told him to use the seal even when not required. He tried not to say the name. The bench did not bully him. It placed him gently in the center of his own sentence. "Thank you," the bench said, when the man had finished saying more than he intended. "You may wait outside." The Count's smile did not shift. He had long practice in lifting discomfort away from himself and placing it under the feet of a servant who would continue to stand. He bowed to the bench. "We will take care, my lord. Those who exceed their instructions shall be corrected with patience. I ask that we return to propriety with the swiftness that keeps markets calm." The bench placed his palm over the convent copy again, as if to still a page that might fly. He spoke plainly. "Markets are kept calm by justice, not speed." He turned to the palace clerk. "No further notices will be posted on the Morales Gate until this review is concluded." He turned to the steward. "No seizure of tools, animals, or renderings will be attempted." He turned to Lucia. "Your lease stands as yesterday." He turned to Isabella. "Your courage is noted. Courage does not entitle, but it clarifies." His gaze moved to the Count. "My lord, your house's service to this city is known. So is the bench's service. We shall be equal to our offices." The Count inclined his head, a concession that cost him little now and promised to cost more later if the wind changed. He preferred not to speak. Silence can sound like magnanimity if a man wears it well. The bench rose briefly, a signal that the formal shape of the hearing had been respected. He announced a short recess before his consideration. The clerk scurried to collect papers, as if he could make a decision by putting sheets in the right stack. Outside the chamber, the air learned to be air again. People who had kept their thoughts folded unfolded them and compared their creases. Some took the Count's quiet as victory. Some took the bench's sentences as shelter. Others considered their suppers and decided to think about justice tomorrow because salt must be measured today. Isabella stepped into a patch of shade, where the wall offered its cool without comment. She leaned there not to rest, but to feel the stone answer her back. Lucia stood beside her. The older woman's face had not changed throughout the hearing. It changed now very slightly, the edges softening as if the muscles had asked for water and been given it. Fray Tomas came to them with a look that had no triumph in it, only relief that the day had not wasted its breath. He said, "Your words were the right size. No one had to put a ladder against them to climb." "Thank you, Father," Lucia replied. She placed a hand lightly on Isabella's arm. "We will go home soon. I promised the jug I would be there to lift it, or else it will sulk." Isabella smiled. It was an ordinary smile, the kind one uses at markets and at bedsides. It tasted better than any other kind. Don Alvaro waited until there was room to be private in a public hall. He did not step too close. He did not lower his voice in a way that would require her to lean in. He showed her the respect of clear words where anyone could hear them if they wished and call them proper. "Isabella," he said, and her name in his mouth did not feel borrowed. "Today I stood with you because a bench must be taught to look where it has not looked in a while. Tomorrow I wish to stand with you because there is a life I mean to make, and it is only honest if you are at the center of it." He paused, not to admire his own sentence, but to breathe. "I ask to marry you openly, not to rescue you, not to hide you, to honor you where everyone may see that honor and get used to it." She did not answer at once. Good women are told to answer at once, so a man will not be made to feel the weight of waiting. She allowed the weight to exist. It is good for words to be heavy long enough to know if they will break what is underneath them. She looked at Lucia. Her mother's eyes were kind. They were not surprised. "Do you know what is being asked of you by their eyes?" Isabella asked him, tilting her head toward the door where the Count's crest had passed. "They will say you could have wed comfort, and you chose a stone you must carry. They will say you took pity and called it love." "Let them name things wrongly," he said. "Names learn better when they are put to work. My comfort does not interest me. My honor does. If it cannot stand the weight of a good woman's truth, it is brittle, and I would rather see it broken than keep it and be useless." Fray Tomas made a small sound that might have been a laugh or a prayer. The two are close cousins. Lucia's mouth became a line that had never learned to pretend. "You speak as if you have listened to yourself for more than one season," she said to him. "That is rare in a young man." He bowed to her in thanks, as if she had shown him where a tool was kept that he had been using wrongly. Isabella looked at his hands. They were steady. She remembered them on the reed pen and on the linen that bound her finger. She thought of the press at home and the way it demands patience, or it bruises the oil. She thought of the night at the palace, and the way her no had made a space around her that had to be filled with something better than fear. She felt the small square of ribbon in her palm, and let it teach her one more thing. "Yes," she said. Then she said, "So there could be no mistaking it. Yes, I will marry you. We will not do it as a hiding place. We will do it as a way of standing." She reached up and did not touch his arm. Not there in the hall, but she let her eyes rest on his in that still way that is not a glance and not a challenge, only a keeping. He did not take her hand in that corridor. He took a ring from his own finger, the signet that made him himself when paper asked for proof. He turned it once in his palm, then closed her fingers around it, shielded by the fold of her ribbon so the world would not mistake his meaning and make a sentence of it before the bench had made its own. "Keep this for me," he said. "Not as a pledge of debt, but as a trust open to the air. What is mine will not lose its name, because you hold it." She felt the metal's warmth where his skin had left it. She did not look at the crest. She looked at the weight. She thought, a ring is a circle, but sometimes it is a straight line between two people. She nodded. "I will keep it. I will return it when we stand before a priest and make the room bigger by speaking two names together." Doña Beatriz passed just then with the air of a woman checking on the category of a day. She saw the small circle of them and chose not to break it. She paused only long enough to say, to the air, "Decisions made in corridors have a way of staying strong. They are not heavy with flowers." Then she moved on, her fan unneeded. The bench returned. People settled as if their bones had remembered chairs. The clerk shuffled the last necessary papers and placed a clean page on the table because justice likes to write on something ready. The corregidor spoke without ornament. "We have heard enough for today. We do not pretend to have the whole season's story from an afternoon's talk, but there is enough to say that haste is unfit. The notices are stayed. The sums in question will be recalculated in the presence of a third party chosen by this bench, with access to the convent's copies. No corrections will be signed in private rooms. The poor will not be sent away on the days named without the parish's knowledge." He looked at the Count. "Your house will assist this process." The Count inclined again. He did not commend the bench. He did not argue. He saved both for later, when rooms were different. The bench continued, looking at Lucia. "You will go home and keep your house. You will be told when to return, not summoned with the urgency of men who wish to win by surprise." He looked at Isabella. "You will speak when spoken to, as you have done today. And if you speak unasked, let it be because silence would be a lie, not because victory has made your tongue hungry." She bowed, which is different from kneeling. "Thank you, my lord." The hearing closed. It did not bang shut like a door that has been slammed. It sighed closed like a book that will be opened again soon. People rose and began to call the day by different names depending on what it had given them. Some said mercy, some said reprieve, some said annoyance. A few said justice, but softly, because it is a word one does not say loudly unless one has seen it, and most had only glimpsed its sleeve. They stepped into the courtyard, where the sun had shifted, and made the tiles gentle underfoot. Isabella breathed and found the air tasted less like wax and more like dust that had remembered it is friendly. Lucia took her daughter's arm and made it look like a habit older than this trouble. Fray Tomas smiled with the knowledge that work has been done and more must be done, and that both truths can exist without hurting one another. Don Alvaro walked beside them to the gate. He did not plan. He did not promise dates and times and trumpets. He said only, "I will speak with the abbess and with the clerk the bench will appoint. We will keep the numbers from learning new tricks. When you are ready to speak to the priest, send a word through the boy with ink on his thumb. He will be proud to carry such a message." "We will," Lucia said. Her voice had a softness in it now, not the softness others had asked for in the hall, but the softness that wraps a loaf so it stays bread and does not become stone. They went home by the short street where the walls know how to keep secrets without making them. At their gate, the notice was still there. It had not climbed down by itself. No one had performed that act of courtesy. The seal looked less terrible in the afternoon. Its edge had lost a little of its bite to the sun. Isabella did not tear it down. She placed her palm flat upon it and pressed lightly, as if to remind it that a hand can meet a seal and not be burned. She tied her apron with what remained of the ribbon and laughed at the knot when it refused to be pretty. Lucia lifted the jug and found it agreeable. The press stood there, accepting the light like any piece of honest work does. Inside, in a small box where she kept little items that held years in them, Isabella placed the torn square of ribbon and the signet ring together. The metal looked no prouder than the cloth. The cloth looked no humbler than the metal. She closed the lid. She did not lock it. She did not need to. Evening came with small tasks that do not ask for a court's opinion. Bread cut, oil poured, a blessing said, without making a show of it. When they ate, they did not talk about titles. They talked about the field and the neighbor with the cough, and the way the cat had begun to prefer the fence to the stoop. It felt like victory. It felt like rest. As the first stars made their slow guesses about where to sit, a boy tapped on the gate. He brought a folded note with the bench's seal and the parish's hand. It named the hour for the recalculation of sums and the person chosen to oversee it. It asked that Lucia bring her papers. It advised her to bring her daughter, because memory lives in more than one head. "We will go," Lucia said. "We will go," Isabella echoed. When the boy left, Isabella stood at the door and looked out at the road that had brought them to the hall and brought them home again. She could still hear the Count's laughter from that night, like a distant instrument that had not learned the tune. It sounded different now. It sounded like something made of air and habit. It sounded like something that would fade if no one clapped. She turned back into the house. She untied her apron and smoothed it on the peg, crooked knot and all. She went to the small box and touched the lid once, just to feel the line of where it met the base, a seam now holding two small promises. Then she blew out the lamp and let the dark be kind. Morning arrived as if it had been taught to walk softly. The yard felt steady. Even the notice on the gate seemed to know it would soon be taken down, not by anger, but by a hand set to right things. Isabella woke before the bell in her chest. She watched light spill over the press and knew what kind of day it wished to be. A day that decided something and left the decision standing. The recalculation was set in the council room of the town hall, a room that did not pretend to be grand. The table had ink stains like old bruises that no longer hurt. The corregidor sat with the patience of someone who had learned that sums take their time to reveal their temper. Beside him stood a third party, a man of small voice and precise fingers, chosen by the bench. On the other side, the palace clerk stacked his papers as if stacking them could make them truer. Doña Beatriz hovered in black silk, like a friendly shadow that knew where to fall. The Count did not attend that morning. His steward did, and the steward's eyes were the kind that look everywhere but inside themselves. Lucia placed her household papers on the table. She did not spread them wide. She made a neat line of days and measures. Isabella stood at her shoulder and set down the convent copies, the abbess's seal, quiet and present. Don Alvaro stood a step behind them, hands at his sides, not on the table, not on a sword he did not carry, his presence the kind of support that does not crowd. The third party cleared his throat. "We will proceed entry by entry." He took the palace ledger first. He did not distrust it. He did not worship it. He read it as if it were a story that might have forgotten a chapter, and then he reached for the convent sheets and asked them to remind the story of itself. He matched dates the way one matches a stitch in a hem, firm, invisible, exact. On the first week in question, he said, "The palace ledger shows a full tithe collected and a half measure supplied to the poor. The convent lists show the poor sent away." He looked up, not to accuse, but to invite explanation. The steward smiled a tired smile. Perhaps the poor did not need that day. "The parish register," said the third party, "shows 3 children named in need." He did not soften those 3 into something else. He let them be the weight in his sentence. The steward's eyelids lowered to half-mast. He nodded, as if to say he would consider the possibility that hunger had made a mistake by arriving on the wrong day. On the second week, the palace ledger shows an arrear placed upon the Morales line equal to the measure missing from the poor list. A seal appears on the summary. The third party turned the page. "The seal is the Count's." The clerk said custom. The third party said habit. He did not say more. He circled the dates in pencil so light the marks looked like the idea of a circle rather than its command. By the third week, the pattern had learned to repeat itself with less shame. The table collected these facts like drops of water until a small pool formed that reflected every face leaning over it. It reflected a house that kept itself. It reflected a hand that pressed wax too deep. It reflected a city that had not paid attention because it had been asked not to. "I will go to the granary," the third party said. He removed his jacket as if to tell the room he was about to ask questions that did not need silk to sound respectful. He left with a clerk from the bench. He did not invite the palace clerk to follow. Doña Beatriz tried to keep the room polite by talking about the weather, and it obeyed her for a few minutes, then remembered it had other work. They returned near noon with sacks counted, measures tested, a list of names the granary had seen more often than the ledger confessed. The third party placed these names on the table, and the table did not sag. He aligned the columns and drew a firm line. Under it he wrote the sum the palace ledger should have carried, then the sum it did, then the difference. He did not speak louder when he wrote the difference. The number, when written correctly, made its own sound. The corregidor lifted his gaze. It was not sharp. It was steady. He ruled that the arrears were void. The Morales tenancy stood clean. He asked the steward to approach. He spoke to him in a tone reserved for men who have learned shortcuts and now are told to walk the path. The steward swallowed the correction. He did not like it. He knew it was not designed to be liked. He bowed and accepted it because a bow is cheaper than changing, and he hoped a bow would be enough. At the door of the hall, a stir trembled the air like a string plucked. A royal courier entered, with a folded packet bearing the thin blue ribbon that means the crown has chosen to notice. He bowed to the corregidor first, to the convent porter second, and to the room as a whole last, which taught everyone where they stood that day. He presented the packet. The bench broke the seal and read. The room, which had already added details to its story, learned it would be adding more. A royal auditor is en route to Toledo for customary inspection of accounts. The language was gentle, almost lazy. The timing was not. It said that the city was part of a larger heart which remembered to beat. When the auditor arrived 2 days later, he wore no sword and no flourish. He carried only a ledger of his own and a pair of eyes that liked numbers to tell the same truth twice. He sat where the corregidor had sat, and the corregidor stood beside him like a man relieved to share the weight of a wall. The count attended then, because when the crown's ribbon decorates a table, one does not send a steward in one's place. The auditor did not ask many questions. The few he did were the kind that leave no room for fancy. Who decided to press the seal to summaries? Who instructed the junior official to delay certain pages until after dusk? Why were the poor turned away on days when the grain moved twice? He spared no one, not because he wished to hurt them, but because his habit did not make exceptions for titles or tenderness. He called for the convent copies, the parish notes, the carter's route. He compared hands the way a gardener compares leaves, not to accuse the tree of being itself, but to see what season it thinks it is. The room learned a lesson about the kind of justice that is not theatrical. It is boring, and in its boredom is its courage. At the end, the auditor wrote 3 orders. The first voided all arrears built on the misapplied seal and returned small coin where small coin had been taken. The second removed certain privileges of local enforcement from the count's household until an independent keeper could be appointed. He used the word pause. The third required that the poor list be posted each week in the square, in a hand large enough for old eyes. He signed these orders with the same pen he had used to make notes and stood without ceremony. In that standing, the room rose in its own estimation, for it had been arranged by something larger than itself and had not broken. The count received these orders with a bow that did not bend deeper than his pride could tolerate. He spoke a sentence designed to be carried to dinner tables that evening. My house prefers accuracy to the appearance of ease. If our habits require amendment, we will be pleased to be better. It was a sentence that would read well on a wall if carved. He left without looking for Isabella's eyes. He did not wish to discover he had nothing left to say to them. On the square, after the auditor had gone, and the official ink had dried enough to travel without smearing, the notice on the Morales gate came down. It did not resist. Paper does not argue with fingers that have learned their own authority. The seal flaked in the sun as if it had never been wax. Lucia folded the notice and set it on the table for burning later. She was not sentimental about such trophies. Isabella touched the place on the wood where the paper had been. It felt like any gate. It felt like a door that belonged to its hinge again. Neighbors came not in procession, but in errands that ended near their yard. They asked to borrow a cup of flour and brought back a cup of stories. They praised the bench in the way people praise a roof when it holds, and the rain is still far off. Some laid a hand on Isabella's arm and did not ask permission to do it. Their touch was the city's way of telling itself what it had seen. She accepted the touch the way one accepts weather, grateful, a little surprised. Don Alvaro did not choose that hour to speak of vows. He lifted sacks, counted measures, and said nothing grand. He had decided that work said the right things if a man listened. At dusk, after the last neighbor had wandered home and the yard had accepted its own quiet, he asked Isabella to walk to the chapel with him. He did not ask the question as a test. He asked it as you ask a person if they would like to see the moon from the hill they have always called theirs. She said yes with a calm that made the air itself feel useful. Lucia wiped her hands and tied her shawl. Fray Tomas joined them at the gate, not as a herald, as a friend. They walked the short road in ordinary shoes, and the stones underfoot did not try to be symbolic. They were stones, good at their job. The chapel smelled of beeswax and thyme sprigs, tucked by someone's pious hand into cracks long ago. The abbess waited near the small altar, her face unadorned by triumph. She had set 2 candles where the light knew how to behave. A handful of sisters had gathered, their voices quiet even in silence. A boy with ink on his thumb tried to stand very straight. He had not yet learned that straightness is a kind of ease, not strain. Alvaro and Isabella stood before the altar without a procession, without a chorus. They spoke their names clearly, the way a person introduces themselves to a stranger on a road where they mean to walk together for a long time. When it came time for the question, Alvaro did not add phrases. He did not decorate. "I take you," he said, and the words made a sound like water poured into a clay cup. She answered with, "I take you," and the cup received it. Fray Tomas blessed them with hands that had blessed things more ordinary and found them holy. Alvaro reached for the signet she had kept. He did not take it back as property. He received it as a gift, returned with interest. He slid it onto her smallest finger, first as a game, then shook his head and moved it to a ribbon the abbess had ready. The ribbon was red, repaired. The torn piece had been braided into a longer strip by steady hands the evening before. He tied the ring at the base of the ribbon and knotted it lightly around Isabella's wrist. "There," he said, "is where our promise sits until the day we choose a simpler band." The room smiled, because a man who understands the difference between a promise and a display is rare. Lucia's eyes carried joy the way a river carries reflections, gently, without effort, and in such abundance that it felt like more than the river alone could make. The abbess intoned a prayer so plain it felt like bread. The sisters hummed a line under their breath, a tune a person could work to. A candelabrum flickered at first in a draught, and then found itself steady when the door closed. Isabella watched the flames stand like little spines and thought, "This is what truth does when you shield it from noise. It does not grow larger, it grows steady." They signed their names in the parish book, their letters neat and legible, even under the pressure of happiness. The boy with ink on his thumb blew the sand too hard and smeared his own name. He laughed and wiped it, and everyone decided the page was better for the smudge. Joy will do that. It will humanize a record. On the way out, a vendor from the market, the olive man with the cool jokes and the warm eyes, met them at the door with a clay cup. He had not meant to be there at that hour. He had heard news while closing up his stall and had walked it like a parcel that needed delivering now. He held the cup out to Isabella. "For your house," he said. "Not because you asked for anything, but because sometimes a thing that breaks in a palace deserves to be replaced with something that will not shatter when a floor is cold." She took it and felt in it the opposite of the goblet that had exploded at her feet that night. The clay was unadorned and earnest. She turned it in her hands and thought it felt like a good word spoken once, correctly. "Thank you," she said. She did not promise never to break it. She promised only to use it well. The city took their marriage into its mouth and found it tasted fine. A few people said quickly that they had always expected such a match. Memory will paint its own triumphs on walls where it did not stand. A few others were silent because they had spent their coin on a different story. The market, which must remain practical, cared more that measures were right, and that the poor list bore names in letters large enough for mothers to see. The Count left Toledo for a season, called to court to discuss the meaning of habits and the cost of being careless with them. He did not leave in disgrace. People like him seldom do. He left with a polite urgency that taught everyone what to say, that he was attending to matters larger than the city's small sums. In the vacuum, the steward learned a new way to hold a pen, and the junior official learned that the weight of a seal is nothing compared to the weight of a room watching your hand. At home, Isabella and Alvaro learned the art of ordinary. They rose early because wheat does not respect late mornings. They argued softly about whether to plant more beans or more barley, a dispute that taught them to match tempers to the size of the thing at hand. They counted coins together without hiding their wants from each other. He taught her a soldier's knot that holds and lets go when asked. She taught him that a knot is only as good as the rope it binds and the purpose it serves. He brought her small parcels of new seed. She gave him a line from a poem her mother had liked, the one about work making hymns out of hands. They went to the auditor's posting of results the following week. It was not a celebration. It was a list. It named houses restored to 0. It named houses returned a measure. It named a clerk moved to a new position where wax would not tempt him. People read their names and felt their spines answer. Isabella looked for the word Morales and found it twice, once in the column of arrears voided, once in the column of thanks sent to the convent for copies. She let both settle in her like a stone warms in a palm. She wore her ribbon in her hair on market days now, not to show off, but because the knot remembered something and she wanted to remember it with it. The signet on the ribbon at her wrist tapped softly against her pulse as she counted olives. People glanced and then let their eyes move on. They had learned that this story did not require them to create any more decoration. It needed only to be lived. One evening, when the heat was kind and the air had stopped being busy, they lit a candelabrum on the table and sat without talking for a while. The light did what it always does when asked to be helpful. It stood. No draught harried it. No hand passed too close. Isabella looked across the table at Alvaro and felt that quiet stretch and fit like good cloth. He reached for the clay cup, filled it, and placed it in her hands. "Drink," he said, and she did, and the cup trusted her. "We did not win a war," she said. "We learned to refuse a small lie until it revealed the larger one behind it." He nodded. "Sometimes, honor is nothing more than counting in front of people until the numbers line up, and everyone can see that they do." She leaned across the table, not to be dramatic but to be near. He did not meet her halfway like a man trying to perform his part. He let her set the distance, which is its own kind of tenderness. Their hands found each other and rested there, not for show, for comfort. The ribbon brushed the back of his fingers. He smiled and turned his hand so that the signet's circle touched his skin. The old habit of sealing had become a new habit of joining. Lucia watched them from the doorway with the satisfaction of someone who has planted a tree and lived to see it shade a yard. Fray Tomas came by later with a loaf and a story about a boy who had learned to pronounce a long word and would not stop practicing it on anyone who passed. They laughed in the short way happy people do, and then they grew quiet again in a way that did not feel like absence. It felt like enough. At the next market day, a stranger asked Isabella if the story they had heard was true, that she had said no to a man whose yes had always been the only answer needed. She thought for a moment and answered the stranger with kindness. "I said no to being made small for the sake of a joke. The rest of it was practice." The stranger nodded as if given bread. He bought oil. He went away less curious and more certain. As seasons moved, the field learned their names the way fields learn the hands that tend them. The press turned with a sound that sounded like prayer, if one had ears for such things. The parish book added new lines: births, deaths, marriages. It began to feel like a tapestry, and Isabella found her thread in it easily. She never sought to be the brightest color. She preferred to be a line that held. The night of their first anniversary, they went back to the palace, not as guests of the Count who was away and not as servants. The city had arranged a dance to mend a season of tightness. The hall had the same light, the same corners. A musician's bow caught a string, and the note wandered up to the canopy like a small bird. Isabella stood where she had stood that night when the goblet broke. She felt no sting in her skin. She heard no cruel laughter in memory. She lifted her chin the way a woman does when the world has learned to see at least part of what she is made of. Alvaro came to her side with simple delight. "Dance with me," he said. "On this floor, in this light, with no lesson being taught to anyone." They danced. Not because music requires it, but because joy does. Their steps were not perfect. They did not need to be. They had learned to love a life that prized steadiness over flourish. People watched them and felt a small kind of envy that did not pinch, because it came with a map anyone could follow. Be honest, be brave, be together, be kind. As the evening ended, a servant passed with goblets on a tray. One wobbled, caught a lip, and would have fallen if not for Isabella's quick hand. She steadied it. The servant blinked in gratitude, and she smiled and put it firm on its circle on the tray. The moment passed with no sound. A broken thing had learned not to break because someone had been taught to hold it. They walked home under stars that knew their own names. The night did not feel like a curtain. It felt like a road. At their door, Lucia had left the lamp burning, and the window cracked to let in air that had remembered the river. They drank from the clay cup and set it down. The flame stood steady. Words did not need to be said to teach the moment what it was. If anyone had asked Isabella to speak to the room again, to the world even, she would have said this and only this. Titles are not promises. They are costumes. A promise is two hands holding the same task. Power is not the right to demand a bow. It is the grace to stand upright together and make room for others to do the same. Dignity begins on the day you decide you will pay the true price for your own breath. Love is when someone else offers to pay it with you, not for you. And when one voice dares to say no to contempt and yes to another hand, the hall that had learned to laugh at the wrong moments falls silent, and in that silence a life begins that does not require anyone's permission to be called good. Thank you so much for listening to this story, all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.